archaic humans. That's not true. We made the same kind of tools. In fact, it is difficult for archaeologists to figure out whether a certain kind of tools were made by modern humans or archaic humans. Many of them had larger brains than us. And as I said, now we know we interbred with them too. So the idea that the modern humans were somehow vastly superior to the other Homo species is not true. They were largely similar. And therefore, when the modern humans first arrived in India, archaeologists today say that it's not as if they spread all over the continent in one fell sweep. It's likely that they stayed out of the way of the already existing population of Homo species. And so the archaeologists would say that the settlement of modern humans in India would have followed a pattern called Indian stage dispersal, meaning they would have reached at different parts of the subcontinent at different times. And the idea is that initially they might have taken a sub-Himalayan route across the Indian subcontinent because of the more robust presence of archaic humans in the peninsular India, and then went across to East Asia. My book also talks about it's also possible that another group went down the western coast and then up the eastern coast, staying out of the mainland, and then across to eastern India. So if they arrived in 65,000 years ago, by when would they have, can we say, would they have had populated the entire continent? The idea is that that might have happened by around 35,000 years ago. Why do we say that? So you see it took a long time. That we can see multiple things happening around 35,000 years ago. On the one hand, the climate starts deteriorating because we are beginning to move into a new glacial age. And when glacial age happens, there's aridity. Large parts of the world become uninhabitable, even in places where land is not covered by glaciers, because most of the water of the globe is locked up in glaciers. There's very little evaporation, and therefore there is greater aridity, and which means there is competition for the few remaining habitats. So that's what is happening around 35,000. At the same time, you also see much greater presence of microliths. These are very small stone tools. Microliths means tiny stone tools, not bigger than a few centimeters, which can be blades, which can be points, which can be arrows, which are essentially then hafted on to bone or wood to create powerful weapons. And this is a tool that only modern humans have been not to make. So this is a significant upgradation in technology by modern humans as opposed to archaic humans. So that's what happens around 35,000 years ago. And third, we also know from genetic evidence that around that time, modern human population rapidly expands in India. So what you see is at a time when there is climatic stress, modern humans upgrade their technology, and they also expand their range into the rest of the country. And I've been to a place called Jwalapuram in Andhra Pradesh, which probably may have been one of the last stand of the archaic humans, because you can see beneath the Toba ash layer, which will take too long, where you can see that this was a place that was occupied by archaic humans for a very long time. And we can see microliths there around 38,000 years ago to 30,000 years ago. So it's possible that this was one of the sites of the last stand of the archaic humans before they went extinct. So by around 35,000 years ago, you can see the modern humans were masters of all that they see in the Indian subcontinent. Very often we ask, who were the first Indians and where did they go? Where did they disappear? And sometimes the answer is, we will often hear the answer that, the people in Andamans are them. But that's a partial answer. Now we know where they went. The real answer to the question, where did the first Indians go, is for us to look into the mirror. Now we know that no matter where in the country you are, most population groups in the Indian subcontinent, no matter where in the caste hierarchy they stand, no matter what language they speak, no matter which region they inhabit, most population groups carry 50 to 65% of their ancestry from the first Indians. This is new understanding, and this is significant. You can easily see why. Because even if you say that the modern humans, are masters of all that they see in the Indian subcontinent by only around 35,000 years ago, they had a very long time to occupy and be of the whole subcontinent for tens of thousands of years before the next migration happens. So this is a significant new finding. Most population groups carry 50 to 65% of the ancestry of the first Indians. This is a sample home of the first Indians. This is Bhimbedka, the main rock shelter. It's called the Auditorium Cave. It's again a fascinating place to visit. But Bhimbedka was occupied not just by modern humans, it has been occupied by, you have evidence that it was occupied for about 100,000 years. So modern humans arrived only around 65,000 years ago, as we learned. So this is a place that has been, this was continuously occupied through most of this 100,000 years until the last few thousand years. So, and it's absolutely fascinating and a site to visit, because they're more uplifting and inspiring than many of the modern homes that you can find. The second migration, now we are moving into the second migration, which we talked about, is from West Asia. Before I go into the details of it, you have to realize that like the first migrants, the out of Africa migration was a global event, right? Because it went out of Africa and affected all parts of the world. It ultimately reached every continent. So the second set, you have to also see this as a part of second set of migrations that happens not just in here, but in many parts of the world, that are caused by modern humans taking to agriculture and farming in many parts of the world. And this starts happening over a few thousand years. Soon after the glacial age ends, around 12,000 years ago, you can see modern humans in many parts of the world experimenting with agriculture. And some of them lead to success, and further they build upon it. Some of them don't lead to success, they are given up halfway. Some of them succeed, but at a very low productivity level and continue forever, even continuing today. So they all had different rates of success depending on the regions they were in and what possibilities they could find. But modern humans were experimenting with agriculture after the glacial age ended in many parts of the world. In India itself, we know, for example, that in a place called Lahore Deva in Uttar Pradesh, in the Ganga plain, there is evidence of first Indians experimenting with rice harvesting. We do not know whether, if they were harvesting wild rice, that we know, whether that moved into actual cultivation of rice, and then they did it, we do not know. The only thing that we know is that it ultimately did not develop into a rice-based civilization in the Ganga plain, even though we can see them experimenting with harvesting wild rice in Lahore Deva. The earliest place in the subcontinent where you can see actual evidence of agriculture starting and sustaining itself and robustly growing over a long period of time is in a place called Mehergarh in the Balochistan province of today's Pakistan. And in Mehergarh from 7000 BC, you can see people, the settlements. You can see that they are beginning to cultivate barley and wheat, not rice. And you can see that some of the burials that they had of the women, they had goats buried along with them around their ankles. So you can see that beginnings of domestication of animals. You can see when you look at their food waste, you can see that in the earlier stages of around 7000 BCE, most of the animals that they eat are hunted, wild animals. But 1,000 years later, you can see most of the animals, more than half of the animals that they eat are domesticated. So this is a place we can see where there is very rapid experiments and additional and happening in terms of both domestication of plants and animals. And genetics is from genetic understanding today, based on ancient DNA, is that there was a migration of people from the Zagros region of Iran into northwestern India around 9,000 years ago or earlier, and that they mixed with the First Asians. It is possible that the First Asians in Mehrgarh were probably already experimenting with agriculture just as the first Indians in Lahore Deva, and that the arrival of the West Asians might have catalyzed the further development of agriculture. But the point is that agriculture spread across like wildfire across the entire northwestern region beginning from around 7,000 BCE. And that's a mixed population of First Asians, First Indians and West Asians. And it is this agricultural revolution and the productivity that it caused that then leads on to the natural development as the next, the Harappan civilization. Harappan civilization therefore grew out of the agricultural revolution that happened in northwestern India, beginning 7,000 BCE. So now we know the answer to one of the questions that we started with. Who were the Harappans? The Harappans were a mixture of First Indians and West Asians. Just some pictures of Harappan cities. You would have seen many of them. This is from Dholavira. It's an amazing site to visit. If you haven't been there, you should, because many of the superstructure is gone, but whatever you can still see, the robustness with which things were built, the scale of the ambition, you are struck by it. It's 4,600 years ago, and there's a stadium, and there are stands for people. You can imagine what that stadium was used for, and there are when they are building those the roads, they are making sure that if there are carts and all going around, they don't get the buildings are not hurt. So their stones are placed in such a manner. This is the largest reservoirs ever built at that time would be in Dholavira, because they had a problem with water. So you found all kinds of ingenious ways to save every bit of water, whether it is rainwater or coming from the river. Absolutely amazing. You couldn't see anything like that ever earlier. That's just a street. There's nothing there, but why is it there? I've taken that picture because when you stand there, it's difficult not to let the image of people, our ancestors, walking down those streets, because this was a thriving city 4,600 years ago. And you had to then wait until the Mauryas came along. That's almost 1,500 years later to see anything similar in scale and ambition. So this is Dholavira. In Rakhigarhi, there's nothing much to see, because whatever they have excavated, they have again, to preserve it. So there's nothing much to see. This is Rakhigarhi, the village just outside. The Harappan civilization was a remarkable one. Initially, people thought that it's an offshoot of the Mesopotamian civilization, but now we know that's not true. It grew out of the developments in agriculture that were happening in the northwestern India. And it had very significant differences. It had a character of its own, very significant differences with West Asian or Mesopotamian or other civilizations. One of the things is that you do not see large statues of kings or emperors, nothing. Even the things that you have seen, the priest king or everything, when you actually see them, they are really small. They're not large deified statues of anyone. They're not large temples. And in the Mesopotamian civilization, there are at least 32 very large, what they called ziggurats, temples. They were the source of power. We do not have anything similar. And most remarkably, the seals and everything that we have in the Harappan civilization, there's no imagery of human on human violence. Imagine that. And there is violence, but that's between humans and animals, or humans and some godlike creatures, and all kinds of other kinds of violence. But human on human violence you can't see, except for one tiny seal which shows a woman flanked by two men on both sides with their spears angled at each other's the heads. So we can't interpret what that is, but that's the only suggested symbol of violence, human on human violence, in the Harappan civilization, which is quite unlike the West Asian civilizations, which really valorize war, violence, and all of those. So this is not to say that Harappan civilization was without violence. Of course, they're humans. There would have been violence, but I think it is worthwhile to note that it doesn't valorize. There are no images that valorize human-on-human violence. So, and this is just when you read the book, you will see lots and lots of differences that the Harappans, it's the largest civilization of its time. We don't not often realize it. As big as the Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations put together, both in terms of land area and in terms of number of people. And it's more standardized across multiple things than any other civilization. Weights and measures. Mesopotamia did not have weights and measures which are standardized. Egypt had to some extent. The bricks that are standardized, the way cities are built. So considering that the Harappan civilization is about 1/3 the size of India today, imagine that, 1/3 the size of India today, that's the extent. And still they managed, without modern communications, transport or any of those things, they managed to pull it together during its mature Harappan phase, which lasted 700 years. We do not yet, until we decipher the script, we will not have full answer to the mysteries of how this was accomplished. So that's the second migration, the Harappans. The third migration happened from East Asia. This again is part of the agriculture-related migrations that populated the world or repopulated the world, because there were two migrations that happened from the agricultural heartland of China after China took to agriculture. The first one was a land-based migration that brought Austroasiatic languages all across Southeast Asia, and the tail end reached India around, this would have been around 4,000 to 3,500 years ago. There was another migration, similar migration from a different part, which took the island hopping route and took Austronesian languages and different family of languages across the Pacific islands. So this migration from East Asia brought Austroasiatic languages, which are today spoken by, as I said, Khasi, Mundari. These are the languages spoken by tribals in Central and East India, and they are related to the Mon Khmer family of languages, which are today spoken in Vietnam, in Thailand, etc. And earlier, there was a lot of assumption that perhaps the Munda tribals or the Austroasiatic language speakers may have been the original inhabitants of India, who then went on to spread to East Asia. But multiple genetic studies have now shown that this is migration from East Asia. They brought new plants and perhaps new farming practices, and this happened around 4,000 to 3,500 years ago. Last migrants, the area. It's interesting to note that the earlier three migrations there's never any political sensitivity. Nobody really bothers. But this is the only migration which has political sensitivity, which we will go into later, into why is that. What is that causes sensitivity about one migration and not the others? As we know, the Dravidian languages are likely to have been linked to the Elamite language of the Zagros region of Iran. That evidence is growing. So if we are saying Dravidian languages were a result of migration from West Asia, but I have not seen any major protests from Tamil Nadu yet on why are you saying Tamil or Dravidian languages came from West Asia. And nobody really objects to the Mundari or the Khasis. So this is a question we'll come to later. The migration happened around 4,000 to 3,000 years ago, and they changed. They made a significant genetic and cultural impact on all parts of India, especially northern India, which spread Indo-European languages across, caused a language shift and caused Indo-European languages to spread across mostly northern India. Today, 2/3 of Indians speak an Indo-European language, and it is the Indo-European languages are spread all across the way from Iceland, which is the westernmost part of the Indo-European language family, and the easternmost part of the Indo-European language family spread is India. There is no community to the east of India that speaks an Indo-European language. So we will come to that later. So these are the four migrations, the four major constituents that constitute the Indian population. My book uses the imagery of a pizza to describe the Indian population. This came because a friend asked me, when he knew that this was the book I was working on, how do you describe the population of my state? And I couldn't come up with anything more than use the pizza imagery. I didn't think I will end up using it in the book, because I thought I will come up with something better, metaphor for it. But the reality is that I have not been able to come up with a better metaphor for the Indian population constitution than the pizza. What does it say? Why is it like the pizza? The base or the foundation is the first Indian ancestry. As I said, this is new information. Without that base, there's no pizza. That's the major one. That's 50 to 65% of most population groups in India. The source that spread over the base of the pizza are the Harappans. Why is that? Because when the civilization declined around 1900 BCE, because of a long drought. Now we know that this is because of a long drought, not because of migration of Aryans or nothing of the kind. And because around 1900, around that time, multiple civilizations were affected by a long drought. And there is now a new geological age that is defined, which is beginning around that time, called a Meghalian age, because this is a global fact. So when the Harappan civilization declined because of a long drought,